Hello everyone, my name is Haley and I'm working with my classmate Sovan to share some ways to manage DMD through everyday nutrition and food. For those of you guys watching who don't know what DMD is, DMD stands for Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and it's a life-threatening genetic disorder that affects a crucial protein called dystrophin. Dystrophin is basically a protein that plays a structural role in muscle cells. And whenever the gene is mutated and the copy of dystrophin is either absent or dysfunctional, that's when you get DMD. Because dystrophin is so important to muscle function, people with DMD usually experience muscle weakness, difficulty with mobility, and muscle degeneration over time as they age. Over the past few decades, scientists and researchers have worked endlessly to find new treatments and therapies to treat and target DMD directly to help prolong the life of people with DMD, to preserve their ability to walk, and to preserve their independence. It's also important to focus on factors that we can control as someone who might know someone with DMD or who has DMD. One of the ways that we can tackle DMD every single day is through nutrition. When we think of treating chronic degenerative diseases like DMD, the first things that come to mind usually involve tackling them head on, and that includes things like medication, physical therapy, and medical procedures. And the way we usually approach it is we wait for symptoms to arise, we wait for them to get worse, and we respond. But there are also certain preemptive measures that we can take to prevent things from getting worse more quickly. And one way to do that is through proper nutrition. So Sovan and I have put together a cookbook to share some of the ways that DMD can be supported with mindful and purposeful nutrition. While the cookbook only has about 15 recipes, we provide tips and pointers throughout the book and with each recipe to tell you what you can avoid and what you can seek out when preparing meals. What this means is that you can apply the ideas in this book to any of the meals you regularly prepare through supplementary ingredients and mindful choices. The cookbook is linked in the description of this video if you're interested, and we have a pretty big variety of foods from different cuisines around the world for you to try, whether you have DMD, know someone who does, or are just curious and hungry. And so with that, we'd like to share some considerations that you can apply to any meal when you cook to support the health of people with DMD. So right here, I actually have a digital version of the cookbook that me and Sovan have been working on for the past few weeks. And I'm gonna go through some of the things to keep in mind that we have in the beginning of the book, so you can integrate these ideas into any meal you cook on a daily basis, and not necessarily just the recipes that we have here. So things to keep in mind include appropriate caloric intake, low glycemic index foods, maintaining protein intake, consuming fiber and fluids, and lastly, looking for calcium-rich foods. So first, I'll be going over appropriate caloric intake. So both DMD and steroid use can cause increased weight gain, and this can occur for a number of different reasons. The first reason is that people with DMD often are not able to get as much physical activity per day as the average person. And this is because of complications or difficulty associated with muscle weakness. And because of that, the required daily caloric intake may be a little bit less. In addition to that, almost all people who have DMD use steroids. It's been found that the use of steroids can significantly prolong the amount of time that people who have DMD are able to remain ambulatory, in other words, are able to continue walking. And the thing with steroid use is that it can increase weight gain by decreasing energy expenditure even further and increasing appetite. So just make sure that whatever you prepare within the day, you're keeping in mind the caloric needs of the person you're cooking for, or yourself if you're cooking for you. On the flip side of things, later on as DMD progresses in the lifetime, many people have issues with dysphagia, which is difficulty chewing and swallowing, and may eventually be dependent for feeding. So while there may be overnutrition in the case that we supply too many calories to a person with DMD, people with DMD later on are also at risk of undernutrition, which is that they don't take in enough food to supply their body with the energy and nutrients that they need to be healthy. And to make it a little bit easier for the recipe specifically in our book, along with the number of servings that each recipe can serve and the cook time, we also include the calories, proteins, carbohydrates, fats, and fiber for each recipe so that you can be more cognizant of exactly what you're putting into your body. Next, I'll be touching on low glycemic index foods. So along with increased weight gain potentially, the use of steroids can also increase the risk of developing insulin resistance. And because of this, if you have DMD, you should try to consume foods that are lower on the glycemic index scale, such as beans, non-starchy vegetables, fruits, and whole grain cereals. In general, you should avoid foods with simple sugars, complex carbs, and trans fats. By doing this, you can lower your risk of developing insulin resistance and basically prevent any further complications related to that. The next thing I'd like to touch on is maintaining protein intake. So, as we all know, protein plays an important role in maintaining muscle mass and muscle function in general. So, it's important to maintain our intake of protein, but make sure not to go in excess, since excess protein intake has not been shown to improve DMD in any way. Some good proteins to include in your diet include beans, lean meats, fish, and dairy. And a deficiency in protein can actually accelerate muscle degeneration over time, so just make sure that you're still having those in your diet without overdoing it. Next, we can talk about consuming fiber and fluids. So people who have DMD are at higher risk of developing constipation, and the primary ways to prevent constipation is through consuming fiber and fluids. And some of the examples of fiber and fluid that you can eat every day include fruits and vegetables. Lastly, we'll talk about looking for calcium-rich foods. So as we said before, as someone with DMD, you might not be able to get as much physical activity as the average person, and because of that, bone strength or maintaining bone strength can be a little bit more difficult. And steroid use also contributes to this. For this reason, a calcium-rich diet can be really beneficial for people with DMD, and some healthy calcium-rich options include dairy, greens, and legumes. So Vaughn and I genuinely believe that being able to enjoy food is one of the best things about life, and so we really want to be able to share a way for you to do that while also maintaining your health. We're aware of the challenges that come up later on in DMD's progression with dysphagia, and so we also included some recipes that are soft, easy to chew or don't need chewing at all to consume, but are still just as tasty. Like I mentioned before, we have a really big variety of recipes from all around the world that we're really excited to share with you all. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Savon to show us a couple of recipes from our book.
Alrighty, so let's get into it. My name's Savon, and I'll be teaching you guys how to make kale and broccoli polenta. So let's give it a little nutritional breakdown. For 4 servings, 1 serving, there are 330 calories in this dish, 15 grams of protein, 42 grams of carbs, 12 fat, and 5 fiber. The reason why we chose polenta is because it's something that's very easy to swallow. It's basically a cornmeal grain cooked down until a smooth paste. But as you can see, I've just been chopping up some kale. So for this recipe, you're going to cut the kale in 2 different ways. You're going to cut into thin strips to saute. You're also going to cut it into larger chunks. Here you can see I'm also adding broccoli to the bowl of larger chunks. What we're going to do with this is boil it until it's fork tender. Go ahead and add 2 cloves of garlic. And for this, you're going to end up heavily salting your water. I used roughly 2 tablespoons. But basically this is to make sure that our vegetables have some flavor, a little bit savory. The content of the salt won't fully enter your vegetables. Some of it will still be in the water, so don't worry about that. And then here you can see I'm gonna dice 1 clove of garlic. We're gonna use this for our saute. So as you can see, I've gone ahead and put my vegetables in the pot. I'm gonna let them boil until fork tender. Now I'm gonna start on my kale saute. So I'm gonna add a little bit of olive oil to a pan. Go ahead and coat the pan evenly. I'm gonna throw in some garlic. For the garlic, saute until fragrant. Once it's fragrant, I'm going to add some lemon juice. This is to give the dish some bright acidity. And then finally you can add in your kale. So with this saute, I'm looking to make the kale softer because kale naturally has a very fibrous texture. I'm going to hit it with some salt to make it a little bit savory, brighten up the dish a bit. But basically, what you're going to do is you're going to cook down the kale until you start to see the stems change color and the leaves should start turning a little bit darker. One way to soften your kale is to add some chicken bone broth. This is also a great way to add protein to your dish. I'm also going to add some black pepper to add some spice. But basically, as you can see, I'm just going to saute until my kale is tender and has shrunk down in size. So now I'm going to check to see if my vegetables are cooked.
You can see my reflection.
I'm going to take a fork and go ahead and check if it's fully tender. If it's not, let it boil for a little bit longer. Now I'm going to start on my polenta. So you're going to add some butter to the pan. This is already ready cooked polenta, so the cooking time is a lot shorter with this. I would highly recommend using this if you're in a rush. Otherwise, you can also opt for the full grain meal polenta. I'm going to go ahead and add 2 cups of bone broth. This is also, again, going to add protein to this dish. Once I've added the bone broth, I'm going to turn the heat to medium to allow it to simmer. I'm going to break up my polenta. Once you reach this consistency, add a bit more. And now I'm going to blend up my vegetables. So as you can see, I put my boiled broccoli and kale into a blender. I'm going to add just a dash of heavy cream, some Parmesan, and a dash of olive oil. I'm going to make sure to salt this. I'm using roughly a tablespoon and a half of salt. I'm going to add some black pepper. And then go ahead and add lots of basil. You can put as much basil as you want, depending on how pesto-y you want your sauce to taste. And then finally, add a little bit of water to make the blending consistency smooth. As you can see, I've hit it in the blender. Make sure to blend all chunks. Make sure that the fibers of the kale are nicely blended. And then I'm going to add a dash of lemon for acidity. So here you can see I've allowed my polenta to cook down. I'm going to add in some Parmesan. Parmesan is an excellent source of calcium, which is important for people with DMD. I'm going to stir that in, combine nicely. As you can see, the polenta gets a little bit richer once you add the cheese and turn off the heat. And now we're going to get to plating. So to plate, I've gone ahead and poured my polenta into the plate. I'm going to add just a dollop of the broccoli and kale puree. Go ahead and spiral that, make it beautiful. And then once you've done that, you can go ahead and add your chopped kale. This is going to add that acidity and brightness to the dish, also a little bit of texture for those who can chew. And go ahead and top with more Parmesan cheese, and there you have it. This is our broccoli and kale puree with polenta. But before we go today, I want to show us one more recipe that we can do using the leftover puree. So I have myself some small macaroni pasta. I'm going to add the puree, add some water, and basically I'm just going to cook this down into a pesto pasta. You're going to add a little bit of lemon zest, give it some more brightness, and go ahead and plate. This has all the same nutritional benefits of the broccoli and kale, like vitamins A, K, and C. So there you have it.